In 1991, Benny Shannon, the Israeli anthropologist, was visiting Latin America, and he spoke to many, many ayahuascas and various other individuals. But the most fascinating message he received was from, of all things, an ice cream salesman. And the ice cream salesman said that many, many years ago, God decided that he wanted to hide the greatest secret. And he thought, shall I hide it on the moon? And then he thought about this and he thought, no, because if I hide it on the moon, it is inevitable that human beings at some stage will travel to the moon. And when they get to the moon, they will find the secret. And then he thought, well, maybe I could place the secret in the bottom of the ocean. And for the same reason, he thought, no, I can't do that, because if I do that, mankind will still find it, and unworthy people will find it. And then in a moment of inspiration, he decided the best place to hide the secret of the universe is deep inside the human mind, because he argued that only the right people will find it, and they will find their own way to it. Now, this is the greatest mystery in terms of ayahuasca. Now, ayahuasca, as you guys know, is a very, very curious compound of two very, very different plants, Banisterius caapi and Psychedelic viridas. Now, the interesting thing about the two plants is that if you actually took the DMT elements of the viridas and you chewed them and you ate them and they went into your stomach and into your system, however much you ate, you would still not get high. And the reason you wouldn't get high is that the stomach and the liver excrete something called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which actually stops it traveling across from the blood into the blood and therefore across the blood-brain barrier, so it doesn't reach the brain. However, it seems that the individuals in the Amazon jungle managed to find two plants, one of which contained DMT and another one which actually contained an MAO inhibitor. And the mystery was, how did these individuals do this? Well, they argued that the plants told them. And the shamans said that when they went shamanic traveling, they would meet entities, normally snakes, and these entities would tell them what to do. Now, Richard Evans Schultz turned around one day in one of his reports and said, this is absolutely amazing. How can this be? It's more than sheer chance that they managed to find these. So the question is, that intrigued me, and I thought, well, how is this happening? And what is it about the idea that DMT can be within ourselves? Now, we know that DMT is in the blood. We know it's in the the fluid within the spine and everywhere else, but there's been great debate as to whether it's actually located in the brain. But there's something else that is intriguing, because individuals claim, particularly people when they go into states of samsara, is that when they go into deep states of meditation, they taste something at the back of their throat. Now, this has been called many, many things. One of the earlier speakers referenced it, amrit, ambrosia, but something that they generally call the nectar of the sublime awareness. And this is a taste that you get at the back of your throat. Now, when a few years ago somebody tried to explain, a guy called Michael Rourke explained his experiences of this, and it's a technique known as Kakada Mudra. And Kakada Mudra is a technique that the practitioners of Hatha Yoga have used over the centuries, and also the Buddha mentions it in the Pali commentaries. And what you're supposed to do is take your tongue and put it right back to the back of your throat, and then you will taste this acidic feeling and sensation. You'll taste it, and it will put you into alternate states of consciousness. So the question is there anything in this? Is there neurologically any evidence to say that there is something happening here? Well, it goes back right to the time of the 49th day of gestation of the embryo. At that stage, a little pouch of skin comes down grows up from the top of the throat towards the center of the brain. And that actually grows into something that is actually known as the adenohypophysis, which actually becomes the front part, the anterior part of the pituitary gland. And it grows up into the center of the brain. it is met coming down by something known as the neurohypophysis, and the two of them join together. So they cause a little thing called the Rathke cleft as they actually join. There's a kind of duct that's developed. It's named after the guy Rathke, who in 1839 discovered this process. Now, while that is happening, there is another organ in the brain that is also developing in the third ventricle, and that's the pineal gland. So the pineal gland and the pituitary gland start to develop together. Now, it has been known for years in esoteric circles that you need to have your pituitary gland and your pineal gland in tune in order to actually open up what's called the marriage, the royal marriage. The sacred royal marriage, where the two come together. Now, what is again intriguing about this is, and Serena Roney Dougal, who actually spoke here 2 years ago, in one of her books mentions this, where she says the intriguing relationship between these two organs, because the pituitary gland is effectively the master gland of the body. It actually regulates hormone release within the body. She called it the master, but the mistress gland is the pineal gland, because the pineal gland does the opposite. It actually suppresses things. For instance, it releases melatonin when you need to go to sleep, these kind of things. And she called it the mistress gland, and she said, like all mistresses, it turns things off rather than turns things on. Okay. So here we have this idea of this cleft that's actually going down. Now, could this be where DMT leaks down? But if it does, we have to prove that DMT actually does occur in the brain. Now, we know that DMT is in the blood, but there's been recent research done over the last, 2009, there was a paper written, published in January 2009, which discussed things called the trace amine-associated receptor sites in the brain, TARS. And these are receptor sites, neuron receptor sites, that actually are designed to react to dimethyltryptamine. So this was the first clue that we have something here. We actually have receptor sites in the brain that have evolved to work with dimethyltryptamine. A month later, there was a paper written which was discussing things called the sigma-1 as well. And this again showed similar patterns whereby it seemed that they were actually designed to work with dimethyltryptamine. So far we can prove then that dimethyltryptamine is a neurotransmitter. That seems fairly evident. But the argument all the way along has been there has never been any evidence of dimethyltryptamine discovered in the brain of live mammals in one way or another. It's the major argument. And the major difficulty, as Rick Strassman has actually said, is because dimethyltryptamine in the brain is very, very transitory. It disappears very, very quickly. And again, there's ethical issues about actually opening somebody's skull to find out what's going on inside their skull while they're still alive. But there has been a series of experiments done by Steve Barker, Jimo Borogin, Rick Strassman himself, and a lady by the name of Isabella Lomnica. And in 2013, they published this paper. And I don't know if anybody's come across this paper at all. This probably is one of the most earth-shattering pieces of news. They did a series of experiments with rats, and to cut a long story short, they discovered dimethyltryptamine in the pineal gland of live rats. The reason they used rats is because neurologically rats' brains work very, very similar neurochemically to human brains. And they've been experimenting on this for many, many years, and this is a known thing in neurology that you use rats for this reason. So suddenly we have a scenario that live rats actually generate dimethyltryptamine in the brain, and specifically in the pineal gland. So now we know that the pineal gland, it's pretty logical to conclude that it does it in human beings as well. So if the pineal gland is generating dimethyltryptamine, we still have the same problem. Because if it does, we're still going to have the same problem as we have with ayahuasca. Because the MAO will still actually stop it becoming effective in one way or another. But the pineal gland also generates a substance called pinoline. And pinoline has harmine, harmaline, and various other MAO inhibitors inside them. So what this is suggesting is that we are all generating our own internal ayahuasca. Now, I know Rick Strassman has said many, many times that he believes that ayahuasca is in fact the modulator of reality. Because as we all know, we perceive reality through our senses. Our brain recreates internally a model of the external world within the brain. So therefore, if that is the case, we start to question what reality really is and whether DMT is fundamental to the human brain and how the human brain develops. So if this all does this, what does this really mean for humanity? Because we've been told all the time that reality is externally out there, and it is real, and it is solid, and it is consistent. And the reason we believe the external world is consistent is because we live in a consensual reality. In other words, we all agree that we are in a lecture theatre. We all agree that it's warm. We all agree that it's hot. So therefore, that proves that it's genuinely real. If I suddenly decide to see little people running around in the room, I'm hallucinating. Or so the term uses. It's labeling. We use the term hallucination because it's a word we use, it's a label that science uses to explain the inexplicable. Because Oliver Sacks has recently written a book called Hallucination, and he deals with Bonnet's syndrome, when elderly people who are starting to develop Alzheimer's and people who are partially sighted see little people running around. Now, how many times in the lectures we've heard today have we heard the stories of people who see little people during DMT trips? In my latest book, I will be discussing this in detail, that Bonnet's syndrome is directly linked. And what is happening is when somebody develops Alzheimer's, what is happening is the DMT is being released by the pineal gland, and they're starting to actually perceive reality in its true sense. It's breaking down the doors of perception. It's going back to Henri Bergson's idea that the brain is in fact an attenuator. It takes information out. But substances such as DMT brings it back in again. Going back to the hallucinations thing, if myself and associate both see little people running around the room, it's a folie à deux. We're both hallucinating. Now, what has intrigued me is, if we are both hallucinating, how are we both seeing the same thing? So science gives a label, folie à deux, but by doing so is implying telepathy, isn't it?
Was howling as well.
I'm sorry?
Well, if the dog was howling as well as you two screaming,
Oh, sorry, yes.
would we imply the dog was hallucinating as well?
Well, possibly, yeah, it could be. But effectively, the dog is in your own worldview. The dog is being processed in your own thoughts. The dog is an external part of the hallucination. It doesn't mean the dog is sharing the hallucination. Okay, so then we get to the situation then that if you have a group of people, if we all collectively see little people running around, what do they call that? Collective hallucination. So the power of the crowd. So effectively, at what stage do we agree that something is not an hallucination when the actual guiding rules that science says an hallucination is suddenly out of the window? Now, one of the things that's intrigued me for many, many years, because I write about normally near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, and I try to write about them neurologically to try to understand exactly what a near-death experience is, what an out-of-the-body experience is. It seems that there is a linking here, that all these things are related in some way. They are all part and parcel of the same Uber phenomenon. And what we need to do is start joining the dots in terms of this, and this is what I'm trying to do in my work. The reason as well that I wanted to talk today was about the machine next door, the Lucia number 3. Many, many years ago, it must have been about 8 or 9 years ago, an associate friend of mine called Evelyn Alassa-Valerano, who is a near-death researcher in Geneva, contacted me one day, and she said, there is a close friend of mine called Dr. Engelbert Winkler, and Dr. Winkler is really fascinated by your hypothesis about near-death experience. The reason being that Engelbert himself had a near-death experience when he was a youngster, and he then became a consultant psychologist. And she said, he's very keen for you to come over because together with a consultant neurologist friend of his, Dr. Dirk Prokol, they have devised something they call the Lucia, or the Lucia, the lucid light device. And they invited me over and they said, come over, test it out. We want you to see what you think of it. So I go over to Geneva, and we're in Evelyn's house near Lake Geneva, beautiful time. And Engelbert turns up and Dirk turn up, and they wheel in this machine. And I don't know if you've seen The Machine Next Door. I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember the original War of the Worlds movie from the 1950s with Gene Barry. It's just like that, isn't it? You know, it's kind of this single eye looking at you. So I go in. This is on YouTube, by the way. If anyone wants to test this, we actually filmed this and it's up on YouTube. And they wheel the machine out and I sit in front of it and I close my eyes and they switch the machine on. Now it's just pure white light and there's flickering going on. And I'm sitting there for about 10 minutes. They gave me the strongest dose, which I thought was really kind of them. And there's light flickering and I'm thinking, nothing's going to happen here. It's going to be really embarrassing. I'm going to have to wake something up because, you know, I can't let them down on this. And then suddenly, bang, in my right visual field, blue light came right across my visual field. And then red light across this visual field, and then they started to swirl in a kaleidoscope effect. And it was the tunnel effect from near-death experiences. The immediate effect was the tunnel experience of sort of being drawn into a tunnel. Now, I know that various people say that the tunnel effect is because there's oxygen in your eyes and you're losing oxygen in your eyes and your eyes are shutting down. I wasn't dying at the time, but I was having that effect. What then happened was very, very strange, because in my extreme right visual field, I could see a movement. Now, I'm a classic migrainer, and if there's any classical migrainers in the room, you'll know what I mean by this. It was like a scotoma. It's kind of the fizzing that you get. And it was down here, and I thought, has it triggered a migraine in me? So I said to Dirk, look, I need to look at this because there's something happening over here. And Dirk turned around and said, no, okay, you can do so because your brain has now encoded the message, so you can look round. And I turned round, and I still today cannot believe what I saw. I was probably 20 miles above a planet. I could see the curvature of the planet, and there were blue lines of light running off to the end of the planet in a checkerboard pattern. I recall, and we did a video on this, and we did a documentary on it. And in the documentary, they show me doing this, but I grabbed the chair. I was so frightened, I grabbed the chair. And being the heroic person I am, what did I do? I told them to switch it off. So they switched it off, and it was like, it literally just went. Now, after that, I started to then, I chatted to them, and again, the video on YouTube shows me chatting to them, and what I didn't intimate to them at the time was something strange was starting to happen. Because I started to get in the center of my forehead, as if a little creature was moving, or something was moving inside my head. It was quite disturbing, and we had a dinner party afterwards, and every 5 minutes or so this thing would move, you know, and I was thinking, am I hallucinating this, or what? Because I'm a fairly grounded individual. I don't expect these kind of things to happen to me. I've never taken any illicit substance, I've never taken DMT or anything. So you guys have got a massive advantage over me. Thank you. So I then go to bed and I start to sleep, and I have the most vivid dreams I have ever had. Absolute three-dimensional vivid colours. And in these dreams, I see snakes. Snakes looking at me, snakes looking down at me. And I'm thinking, what is all this about? Because I didn't know the subtext at the time, because I wasn't aware of the subtext. And that's what I find amazing about this, is I did not know anything about the world of DMT and everything else. I then subsequently started researching it, and I contacted a friend of mine who is an out-of-the-body trainer called Robert Bruce. Not the Robert Bruce who's long dead, but a Robert Bruce who's an Australian guy. And he said to me, look at the back cover of my book. And I looked at the back cover of his book, and it's what I'd seen. And he said, that is what is known as the astral plane, which I think is a contradiction, because it wasn't a plane, because it was a planet, but beside the point. And then I then started rereading my Carlos Castaneda. And I discovered that Castaneda has a thing called the lights of the world, and they're blue lights. So I'd seen these blue lights, and I'm suddenly thinking, gosh, this is really sort of deep-rooted stuff that I'm seeing here. These are archetypes that are being generated in my mind. But then the most amazing thing happened was when I then read Jeremy Narby's book, The Cosmic Serpent. And I guess many of you have read Narby's book. And in there, what does Narby say? He goes and he takes ayahuasca, and the snakes talk to him. I think the snakes, and I know Narby has the same concept, the snakes are symbols of DNA. And I think it's the DNA that's talking to us. Because if you look at the symbolism of the caduceus, you look at the magical traditions throughout the ages, you will find the symbolism. And again, if you look at the caduceus, you'll see the twin snakes going up, and they will come to the top, and there'll be two wings, and in the middle there will be a little circle. Hemispheres of the brain, pineal gland. The two things coming up are the Ida and the Pingala, which are the things to do with Kundalini experiences. So this is all the wakening up of the Kundalini experience. So suddenly there are all these different traditions. And in my book, The Infinite Mind Field, I go into great detail, and one of the speakers earlier on was talking about Zoroastrianism and the way in which the Zoroastrians believe things to be, the way the ancient Egyptians believed it. If you start looking for the information, it's there in plain sight. This is something that has been known for centuries, and it's something that absolutely fascinates me, and I feel I'm only just on the start of a journey. But I believe that what we're discovering here is something very, very important. And may I suggest tomorrow, if you get the opportunity, you must go and see Martin W. Ball speak tomorrow, because Martin has something called the entheological paradigm, which I touch upon in my work, but nowhere near to the extent that Martin does. And the entheological paradigm is the old Bill Hicks diktat. We are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. And that is exactly what I think is happening here. It is something much deeper inside us. The symbolism of the DNA. There's something very, very profound. And you sometimes feel that this generation, we're kind of tripping on a big secret. But we can't see it. Because the secret is deep inside our brain, as the ice cream seller told Benny Shannon in 1991. Thank you.